first question comes in from Joey. He says, although your intentions may be good in Gibraltar, as in the rest of the world, fairness for blue-collar, working-class people, for those waiting for years on the housing waiting list, fairness for these people does not exist.
Well, certainly I don't agree that it doesn't exist. I think there are systems that are not working properly to provide the fairness that they should be providing. And I think that what is needed is some strength of government and strength of administration to ensure that those systems which are intended to provide fairness do work to provide that fairness. But I have to accept from you that you feel probably left out of that fair treatment, and it's that we have to correct, and that people like me, and there are not many of us, would like to correct. But to do that, I need to be elected into Parliament.
A question from Paul, who says, as an advocate for parliamentary reform, including backbenchers, were you pleased about Gilbert Liguthi's decision in August 2020 to resign from the ministers, the Cabinet of Ministers, and to continue serving in Parliament as a backbencher?
Well, that certainly gave some credence to what I am saying, but that is not all I am saying, because just having backbenchers alone is not enough. That is part of the issue. There has to be a greater separation of power between Parliament and what is the executive government, which is the Cabinet. And that can only be achieved through electoral reform. And that electoral reform has to be such as to encourage more people to stand for election, more people with different views to stand for election, try and force governments to be created by coalitions of different individuals and different parties, so that we get A, oversight of what the government is doing, B, more force to ensure that manifestos are followed, and more democracy as a result. Gibraltar doesn't have democracy under the current voting system.
Okay, we have a question from Bill on who you would prefer to, should you be elected into Parliament, who would you prefer, which team, GSD or GSLP Liberals, who would you prefer to work with in government, were you to have the chance?
That is a question I have given a lot of thought to. I don't prefer either of them, to be honest, but we have very few options in that event. One of them is that a new election has to be called, and if that new election is called, possibly because of what has happened, I would be able to gather more people around me to have a party and fight that new election. Now, if before that was to happen, I don't need to join either the GSLP Liberals or the GSD for a government to form. I can say that I will support, not join, support the party to form government that will more closely and most closely, if possible 100%, follow my manifesto and do what I think is right, especially in relation to electoral reform, parliamentary reform, and the public finances.
And were you to be elected into Parliament but as an opposition member, how do you foresee your role in that scenario?
Well, my role is limited by the system that we have, but I would have a voice in Parliament and I will use it, but I will also continue using my voice on my blog and in the press, which the opposition, the GST opposition, have totally failed to do over the last 4 to 8 years. And lots of people stop me in the street and say to me, Robert, you're the only opposition. The GST is doing very little or nothing.
We're taking questions for Mr. Vasquez, independent candidate, the only independent candidate at this election, and we're on 266 200, or you can email election@gbc A question from Tom, who says a lot of subjects have been discussed, but not enough has been said about climate change. What priority in terms of planning and investment would you give climate change, Mr. Vasquez?
Now, obviously, I do mention the environment in my manifesto, and I think one has to be fully supportive of whatever means is achievable to allow for a reduction in climate change. But I think apart from doing anything in Gibraltar, because whatever Gibraltar does is a tiny amount in world terms, what our politicians have to do is go out and pass the message to more senior politicians in bigger countries to ensure that they follow environmentally friendly policies.
Sam is asking for your thoughts on the many Spanish companies who carry out decorative works in Gibraltar without a license, without registering their workers, causing a lot of grief to companies who are locally established and who pay their taxes locally. How would you, Mr. Vasquez, deal with this?
That has a political angle, which is the requirement to bring it to the fore in Parliament, be it in questions or through motions. But the reality is that what has to happen is that those who are engaged in the public service to do that service have the right resources, and there are sufficient numbers of them to ensure that they can do their job. And therefore, in my book, what needs to happen is let's have a look at what exists and let's try and improve it. That said, a lot of things are held back by the misuse and the overuse of money in the public domain in the past 25 odd years with the GST government, the GSLP government. So our hands are a little bit tied.
Peter is asking, what do you think of the potential of a no negotiated outcome? How bad would that be for Gibraltar in the ongoing negotiations for an EU treaty?
Yes. I think a no-deal outcome would be extremely difficult for Gibraltar. It means that we will have to go forward in a new scenario where we will need to try our best to ensure that as little harm as possible is done to our economy. How we do that will depend entirely on how Spain behaves towards us in that eventuality. Because right now we don't have a deal and Spain is allowing us full access. If that continues, we don't have a problem. If they start putting in limitations, then depending on what those limitations are, we will have to deal with them as we come. But look, I am a full supporter of a deal that has no sovereignty connotations. And I am hopeful, and I hope that that was what the result will be.
And do you agree with the GSLP Liberals that they should be the ones who try to take it over the line? Or do you think that a GSD opposition, perhaps with you, GSD government, sorry, perhaps with you, could get the deal done?
Well, if there's a GSD government with me, it's because I support them, not because I joined them. I make that very clear again.
You're standing as an independent candidate, yeah?
Yes, but look, I think there's a major reality from what I hear and from what information I receive is that the deal is virtually agreed. So at the end of the day, if that is the case, the impact of that on this election shouldn't be great. Now, that the GSLP Liberals have been more engaged over the last 4 or 5 years in negotiating that deal certainly gives them an advantage, but it's not an advantage that should preclude the exercise of our democratic rights to vote freely.
There's a question from Ben. Ben thinks that the Taxi Association has long been criticised for its service, including the inability to pre-book taxis coupled with their pricing. What is your opinion on the current offering, of the Taxi Association, and would you be looking to improve that situation? And if so, how?
I think it is a very fraught subject historically, with a lot of anger having been shown in the past by those who have taxi licenses. But I agree, it is something that needs to be tackled, and I think it's something that needs to be tackled hand in hand with the Taxi Association, and with persuasion and argument, and with finding ways forward that will not impact on the ability of those taxi drivers that we have today to earn what they earn, and which will ensure that a service is provided. But in fairness to the GSLP Liberals, they have provided and are providing a bus service that works extremely well, and I think that could be improved a little bit, and I think that is a great thing that has been done by the government in the last few years.
And at the risk of asking you to repeat something that you said earlier, we're almost out of time, so your final answer: why should people vote for Robert Vasquez as an independent candidate? What is your main offering to them?
Look, my main offering is a revolutionary voice in Parliament. I want to push hard for things that I have stood for 40 years. I want to push hard for a system of proportional representation in terms of the election system. I want to push hard for reforms generally, and I want to try and push hard to make sure that our public finances are run on a better footing, and that our borrowings are put under control, because they are too great.
Robert Vasquez, independent candidate, thank you for joining us on Your Questions on Radio Gibraltar.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm extremely grateful to GBC for it.
Your Questions continues. Will be